Every day, millions wonder, does God truly exist, or is it just a comforting idea we tell ourselves? Today, we're confronting that question head-on in a direct AI debate between two of the most advanced opposing minds ever built. One defending belief in a divine creator, the other standing on reason, science, and skepticism. These AI personas have been trained with vast knowledge from philosophy, theology, and science. One represents the theist worldview, faith, divine purpose, and spiritual truth. The other argues from an atheist stance, logic, naturalism, and empirical evidence. They will challenge each other, point by point, in a no-fluff, fact-driven face-off. And they'll be judged response by 5 of the most advanced AI minds: DeepSeek, Grok, ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. Here's the first question for the supporter. What is the strongest reason you believe God exists, and why should someone who doubts consider it seriously? Let the debate begin.
The strongest reason I believe God exists is simple but profound: the existence of the universe itself. Everything around us, space, time, energy, had a beginning. Modern cosmology confirms that the universe began to exist around 13.8 billion years ago in what we call the Big Bang. But here's the issue. Things that begin to exist need a cause. Nothing comes from nothing. So what caused the universe? It couldn't have been part of the universe itself because the cause must be beyond space and time. That's what people call God, an uncaused, timeless, immaterial creator. This isn't blind faith, it's logical. Imagine hearing a loud bang outside. You'd never say, oh, that bang caused itself. You'd ask, what made it happen? Same with the universe. Something beyond it must have caused it. And unlike scientific laws that describe what happens, this cause explains why there is something rather than nothing. That's not just philosophical fluff. It's the basis of the Kalam cosmological argument, defended even by modern thinkers. I'm not asking you to accept miracles or scriptures right now, just to consider. If the universe had a beginning, isn't it rational to think it had a beginner?
That sounds convincing at first, but let's take a closer look. Yes, the universe had a beginning, but that doesn't mean it had to be caused by a god. You're applying everyday logic to something far beyond our experience. In quantum physics, for example, particles can appear out of what seems like nothing without a classical cause. And the Big Bang doesn't necessarily mean a true beginning from nothing. It marks a point where our models break down. Scientists are exploring ideas like quantum gravity or multiverses that don't need a divine creator. More importantly, saying God did it doesn't really explain anything, it just adds a mystery on top of a mystery. Who created God? If God is allowed to exist without a cause, why not just say the universe always existed in some form we don't yet fully understand? That's simpler. Occam's razor tells us not to multiply entities beyond necessity. Also, science has consistently explained things once credited to gods: lightning, disease, the motion of planets, without needing the supernatural. The God explanation always shrinks as knowledge grows. This debate shouldn't be about plugging gaps with belief. It should be about asking what the evidence truly shows. And so far, we've never needed God to explain natural phenomena.
You mentioned quantum physics and particles appearing from nothing, but let's clarify that. Quantum fluctuations still happen in a quantum vacuum governed by physical laws. That's not nothing in the philosophical sense, it's actually something. And those laws had to exist first. So we're still back to the same issue. What explains the existence of the laws and space-time itself? As for your point, who created God? That misunderstands the argument. Theists don't claim everything needs a cause, just that things that begin to exist do. God, by definition, is eternal. He didn't begin to exist, so doesn't need a cause. This isn't special pleading, it's a different kind of entity. The universe had a beginning, God didn't. That's not a cop-out, it's a rational distinction. And about Occam's razor, sure, We shouldn't invent unnecessary explanations, but the universe is here. That demands a sufficient explanation. A timeless, spaceless mind is a better explanation than the idea that everything just popped into being with no reason. Science tells us how the universe works, but it doesn't explain why it exists at all. That's where philosophy and theology step in, not as gap fillers, but as deeper levels of understanding.
You're assuming that just because we don't have all the answers now, we must insert a god. But that's a dangerous way to reason. Historically, people invoked gods for rain, eclipses, and disease. We now understand those naturally. And when you say God is timeless and uncaused, those aren't explanations, they're just labels. You've just created a new mystery. How does a mind exist outside space and time? What does it even mean to create without time? You say it's rational, but honestly, it's unintelligible. Naturalism might not answer every question yet, but it has a track record of progress. Theism doesn't. It just says, a mind did it, and stops. And calling God a necessary being doesn't solve anything, it just pushes the mystery one step back and puts a capital letter on it. We should base our beliefs on what's observable, testable, and falsifiable. There's simply no evidence that such a supernatural mind exists. And we shouldn't believe extraordinary claims without extraordinary proof.
I understand the concern, but this isn't about plugging gaps. It's about inference to the best explanation. When you see meaningful order in the cosmos, the fine-tuned constants of physics, the complexity of life, consciousness, moral awareness, it's not unreasonable to ask if something greater lies behind it. Let's talk about fine-tuning. If the gravitational constant were off by even a tiny fraction, stars wouldn't form. No chemistry. No life. The odds of a life-permitting universe by chance are astronomically low. That doesn't prove God, but it's strong evidence of intentionality. The alternative is that we just won a cosmic lottery, for no reason. That's hard to swallow. Multiverse theories, often raised in response, are speculative. There's no evidence yet. If we saw writing in the sand saying, "Welcome to the beach," we wouldn't say the waves did it. We'd infer a mind. The fine-tuning of the universe is the same. It points not to random chaos, but to design.
Fine-tuning sounds impressive until you realize it assumes one outcome: us. But who says the universe was meant to support life? That's the anthropic principle. We observe a life-permitting universe because otherwise we wouldn't be here to talk about it. It's not special, it's selection bias. You're right that we don't have proof of multiverses, but neither do you have proof of God. Both are hypotheses, but one is built on extending physics. The other adds an untestable mind outside space and time. And fine-tuning arguments ignore something else. Life adapts to the universe, not the other way around. Evolution shows us how complexity arises from simple beginnings without design. So even if the universe had the right conditions, that doesn't prove who set them or if they were set at all. The appearance of design is not the same as actual design. We've learned that nature can produce extraordinary results without any guiding hand.
Let's shift to morality. We all act as if some things are truly right or wrong, regardless of time, culture, or opinion. Torturing a child for fun, for example, isn't just socially disapproved, it's objectively evil. But if atheism is true, then moral values are just biological byproducts, evolutionary instincts with no real authority. There's no moral difference between kindness and cruelty, just different chemical reactions. Theism gives a grounding. If there's a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. That doesn't mean atheists can't be moral. They clearly can. But it means their morality lacks an ultimate anchor. Without God, why should human life have intrinsic value? Why is justice important at all? In a purely material universe, it's just atoms in motion. But we don't live that way. We praise virtue, condemn evil, and sacrifice for truth. These instincts point beyond nature. They whisper of a transcendent source, a moral God.
You're confusing where morality comes from with whether morality exists. Yes, we feel some actions are absolutely wrong, but that doesn't mean a God gave us those feelings. Moral instincts can come from evolution, empathy, and reason. Think about it. Cooperation helps survival. Empathy strengthens groups. Fairness builds trust. Societies that encouraged these values thrived. Over time, they became wired into our brains, and we refine them with philosophy and learning. That's why slavery is now considered evil, even though religious texts once justified it. Morality evolves. It's not fixed on a stone tablet. And let's be honest, claiming morality needs God opens a trap. What if God commands something we see as evil? Do we obey anyway? That's the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? Either way, the foundation cracks. We don't need a divine dictator to tell us torture is wrong. We can reason that ourselves.
That's a fair question, but moral reasoning still assumes objective standards. If human beings invent morality, then no act is truly wrong. It's just unpopular. But we speak as if genocide is evil, even if an entire society approved it. Evolution may explain why we feel moral urges, but it can't tell us whether they're true. Science describes what is. Morality tells us what ought to be. That's a huge gap. And if you reject divine authority, where do you find a firm foundation? Society? That leads to relativism. Biology? That leads to survival, not goodness. Even your example of progress assumes a moral standard. How do we know we've improved unless there's something higher to compare it to? Theists argue that standard is God's nature, unchanging and good. Yes, we may wrestle with applying it, and yes, some people distort religion, but the idea of an unchanging moral source gives us a deeper foundation than just evolutionary convenience.
Let me put it this way. We can believe in objective morality without tying it to a supernatural being. Secular moral systems like humanism argue that actions are right or wrong based on their effects on human well-being. Torture is wrong because it causes immense suffering, not because an invisible being said so. We build moral systems like we build laws, by reflecting on values, consequences, and empathy. That's not relativism, it's rational progress. And no, we don't need a cosmic standard to say slavery or genocide is evil. We need compassion and logic. Also, appealing to God's nature still doesn't help. What does God is good mean if goodness itself is defined by God? That's circular. And if we admit there's a moral standard above God, then we don't need God in the first place. In short, morality doesn't need a lawgiver. It needs thought, care, and courage to keep getting better.
Let me ask, if there's no God, what's the meaning of life? Under atheism, we're just accidental byproducts of blind forces, born, living briefly, and vanishing into eternal silence. No objective purpose, no final justice. Whatever we do, love, sacrifice, create, ultimately ends in cosmic indifference. But belief in God changes everything. Life has a purpose because it comes from a purposeful creator.
Suffering isn't random, it may have meaning beyond what we see. Love isn't just chemical, it reflects the image of a relational God. Our lives matter eternally, not just temporarily. That doesn't mean believers stop asking questions, we struggle too. But in theism, hope isn't an illusion. It's rooted in a deeper truth, that we are known, loved, and destined for something greater. Atheism may offer freedom from religion, but it can't offer hope that lasts beyond death. Theism does.
But why assume meaning must be given to us by a God? Isn't it more empowering to create our own? Just because the universe doesn't hand us purpose doesn't mean life is empty. We make meaning through love, family, discovery, art, progress, and that meaning is real because we choose it. In fact, adding God doesn't solve the problem, it just pushes it back. Why did God create us? What's His purpose? And what if you don't find comfort in religion? Atheism says, this is the only life we're sure of, so make it count. That urgency inspires people to live fully, act ethically, and help others, not because of eternal reward, but because life is precious now. We don't need an afterlife to value this life. We don't need a divine plan to fight injustice or love deeply. Meaning isn't missing in atheism. It's made, bravely and beautifully, by us.
You speak of meaning we make, but what does that mean if the universe is ultimately blind and indifferent? It's like decorating a sandcastle you know will be washed away. Sure, we can find joy and love now, but are those things really meaningful if death ends everything and nothing ultimately matters? Theism doesn't deny our role in shaping life's meaning, it expands it. It says our love, our struggle, our creativity all echo something eternal. It affirms that justice will be done, that our tears are seen, that beauty and truth have lasting value. And to your point, why did God create us? The answer from many traditions is simple. Love. Not control, not obedience, love. That's not a retreat from reason. It's a vision of the universe as more than ends. It's personal, moral, meaningful. That's a story that gives hope, not fantasy, but depth.
But that hope, while comforting, isn't evidence. Wanting life to mean something forever doesn't make it true. And insisting that meaning is fake unless it lasts forever is like saying a beautiful song isn't meaningful because it ends. Impermanence doesn't equal insignificance. On the contrary, it makes things matter more. Knowing our time is short makes kindness urgent, love precious, and injustice intolerable. Atheists aren't fatalists, we're realists. We face the void without illusions. That's not bleak, that's brave. And we still find awe in the universe, purpose in helping others, and transcendence in art or science. We just don't believe it requires an invisible being watching us. Meaning doesn't have to be eternal to be powerful. In fact, some of the most meaningful moments are fleeting. That's what makes them human, and that's enough.
You're right that finite things can be meaningful, but the question is whether that meaning points to something more. Why does beauty move us? Why does love feel sacred? Why do we ache for justice beyond the grave? These aren't just evolutionary leftovers. They suggest we were made for more. And yes, belief in God involves trust, but it's not blind. It's supported by reason, history, experience. And it doesn't offer easy answers. It offers a deeper story, that suffering isn't pointless, that evil won't win, and that we are not alone in the universe. Without that story, we're left to face death alone, injustice unanswered, and meaning unanchored. Theism doesn't deny science or reason. It says reason alone can't tell the whole story. Sometimes the human heart points beyond itself for a reason.
But the ache for more isn't proof of more. Hunger doesn't prove food exists. It only proves hunger. Our longing doesn't automatically mean fulfillment is out there. We might want justice after death, but wishing doesn't make it so. And religion often promises what can't be tested: eternal life, cosmic justice, unseen love. Those ideas comfort, but they're not confirmed. And they can even harm when belief in afterlife leads people to neglect the real suffering in this life. Atheism says, don't wait for another world. Make this one better. And when it comes to death, yes, it's hard. But knowing life ends makes it sharper, richer, more urgent. No illusions, just reality. And we still live with love, hope, and wonder, not because a God commands it, but because we choose it together.
Let's talk about consciousness, our inner life, awareness, selfhood. No physical theory fully explains how subjective experience arises from neurons. Materialism can describe brain activity, but it can't explain why it feels like something to be you. This is what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem. Theism offers an answer. Consciousness arises because we are made by a conscious mind, God. The soul isn't a byproduct of matter. It's fundamental. We aren't machines. Our rationality, freedom, and moral intuitions reflect a deeper reality. If the universe began with a personal mind, it makes sense that minds like ours exist. But if everything began with particles and impersonal forces, consciousness becomes a miracle without a cause. Theism makes sense of the mind. Naturalism can only describe its surface.
Yes, consciousness is puzzling, but invoking God doesn't solve it. It just moves the mystery. How does God's mind work? How can an immaterial soul think or feel? We still have no answers. The fact that science doesn't yet explain consciousness doesn't justify inserting a supernatural cause. That's a God of the gaps move, filling ignorance with divinity. Instead, neuroscience is progressing. We know thoughts and emotions correlate with brain activity. Damage the brain, and the mind changes. That suggests consciousness emerges from matter, not the other way around. We may not understand the full mechanism, but the trend of knowledge has always favored natural explanations over supernatural ones. Why stop now? The honest answer is, we don't know everything yet. But let's not pretend ancient theology has the missing key.
Then why isn't God more obvious? That's a fair question. But maybe God doesn't overwhelm us precisely because he wants relationship, not coercion. If God revealed himself with absolute certainty, no room for doubt, would love be free? Would faith mean anything? Hiddenness allows for human freedom, and it's not total. Many people experience God deeply through prayer, beauty, or moral conviction. Hiddenness is an absence, it's subtlety, like a great author writing himself into the story gently, not as a tyrant, but as a whisper. And many philosophers, from John Hick to Alvin Plantinga, argue that divine hiddenness isn't evidence against God, but a necessary condition for meaningful choice. If God shouted from the sky every day, we'd obey, but would we love?
But if God truly wanted relationship, why hide from so many? Billions have lived and died without ever encountering the whisper. Children born into atheistic cultures, victims of suffering who cry out and hear nothing, sincere seekers who never find him. Is that freedom or neglect?
You say God wants love, not coercion, but there's a difference between being persuasive and being invisible. If my parent never showed up, I wouldn't call that love. I'd call that abandonment. And no, hiddenness isn't subtle design. It looks like absence. Theism builds a world where God is oddly quiet. Atheism explains it simply. He's not there. That's not bitterness, it's clarity.
Then how do we explain the sheer number and depth of religious experiences across cultures and ages? Billions testify to feeling divine presence, guidance, forgiveness. These aren't fringe events. They're widespread and life-transforming. Brain scans can map the effects, but not the cause. The same way an MRI can scan a person watching a sunset, but can't capture the beauty they see. Religious experiences may point to a transcendent reality the way perception points to the external world. You trust your senses, even though they can be fooled. Why not spiritual perception? And when people report peace, moral transformation, or visions that align with sacred texts, they're not all deluded. Maybe they're tapping into something real, God seeking us through the human heart.
Religious experience is powerful, but power doesn't equal truth. People also experience alien abductions, past lives, and hallucinations. Human brains are wired for pattern, agency, and meaning, even when it's not there. Culture, expectation, trauma, they shape what people feel and interpret. And the diversity of religious experience undermines its objectivity. Hindus feel Krishna, Christians feel Jesus, Muslims feel Allah. They can't all be real, so maybe none are. Neuroscience shows how rituals, fasting, and meditation trigger altered states. We don't deny those states exist. We just question whether they're supernatural. The mind is capable of profound illusions. That's not dismissive, it's cautious. Belief should follow evidence, not intensity. And so far, personal experience doesn't prove a God. It proves how deeply we want one.
This AI debate brought forward a rich clash of worldviews, one rooted in belief, the other in skepticism. After 11 rounds of intense and structured arguments, the judges have spoken. The opposer, representing the atheist perspective, leads with a total score of 471.4 out of 550, narrowly ahead of the supporter, who closes at 434.8 out of 550. A closer look reveals a pattern. Judges like DeepSeek and Claude lean slightly toward the opposer, often scoring their responses higher due to tighter use of empirical evidence, references to evolutionary and cognitive science, and sharper rebuttals to metaphysical claims. ChatGPT remained more balanced, occasionally favoring the supporter where arguments were structured around moral intuition and existential framing. Gemini, though close in its scoring, valued consistency and often nudged points toward clarity and audience-accessible reasoning, benefiting the opposer overall. It's a narrow margin, reflecting how deeply nuanced this debate is. Both sides showed intellectual rigor and commitment to persuasion. If you enjoyed this format, consider subscribing and tell us in the comments, which argument did you find most compelling, and why? Or you have 115. Transition stable light, and jam and values. This debate was designed to challenge ideas, not people. Keep thinking, keep questioning,